Hello and welcome to the session Cognitive Theories of Learning by Gestalt Theory and Lewin'S Field Theory. Theory of Insightful Learning or Gestalt Theory. The views propagated by behaviorists in the form of an association between stimuli and responses for understanding learning faced great difficulty in explaining learning processes or behavior involving higher cognitive abilities. The chance success through trial and error or association through connectionism and conditioning may account for simple acquisition of knowledge, skills, interests, habits and other personality characteristics, but is not sufficient to account for problem solving, creativity and acquisition of other similar cognitive behavior including insight, that is, learning that appears to come suddenly. Dissatisfied with the approach of behaviorists, the cognitive psychologists try to see learning as a more deliberate and conscious effort of the individual rather than a product of mere habit formation or a stimulus response machine-like mechanism. According to them, in a learning process, the learner does not merely receive or make responses to the stimuli, but definitely processes, that is, interacts with and does something about what he receives, and his response is determined by that processing. Thinking along these lines, a group of German psychologists called Gestaltists, and particularly Wolfgang Köhler, originated a learning theory named insightful learning. Gestalt is a German noun for which there is no English equivalent, so the term was carried over into English psychological literature. The nearest English translation of Gestalt is configuration, or more simply an organized whole in contrast to a collection of parts. Gestalt psychologists consider the process of learning to be a gestalt, an organized whole. The basic idea of the theory is that a thing cannot be understood by the study of its constituent parts, but only by the study of it as a totality or whole. In fact, the focus of Gestalt theory has been the idea of grouping, that is, characteristics of stimuli cause us to structure or interpret a visual field or problem in a certain way. The primary factors that determine grouping are proximity. Elements tend to be grouped together according to their nearness. Similarity. Items similar in some respect tend to be grouped together. Closure. Items are grouped together if they tend to complete some entity, and simplicity. Items tend to be organized into simple figures according to symmetry, regularity and smoothness. These factors, also called the laws of organization, have been explained in the context of perception and problem solving by Gestalt psychologists. In practical terms, Gestalt psychology is primarily concerned with the nature of perception. According to it, an individual perceives a thing as a whole, while the behaviorist and stimulus response theorists define perception so as to make it analogous with the taking of a photograph. They hold that sensation comes prior to meaning and consider these two acts as separate. But the Gestalt psychologists do not separate sensation of an object from its meaning. They are of the opinion that unless a person sees some meaning in an object, he will pay little or no attention to it. What is more, to the Gestalt psychologists, the meaning of sensation or perception is always related to the total situation. According to them, perception always involves a problem of organization. A thing is perceived as a relationship within a field which includes the thing, the viewer and a complex background incorporating the viewer's purposes and previous experience. Gestalt psychologists try to interpret learning as a purposive, exploratory and creative enterprise instead of trial and error or a simple stimulus response mechanism. A learner while learning, always perceives a situation as a whole, and after seeing and evaluating the different relationships, takes the proper decision intelligently. He always responds to the proper relationships rather than to specific stimuli. Gestalt psychology uses the term insight to describe the perception of the whole situation by the learner and his intelligence in responding to the proper relationships. Köhler in 1925 used the term insight first of all to describe the learning of his apes. During the period 1913 to 1917, he conducted experiments on chimpanzees in the Canary Islands and embodied his findings in his book. These experiments demonstrated learning by insight. Some of Köhler's experiments are now described. In one experiment, Köhler put the chimpanzee Sultan inside a cage and a banana was hung from the roof of the cage. A box was placed inside the cage. The chimpanzee tried to reach the banana by jumping but could not succeed. Suddenly, he got an idea and used the box as a jumping platform by placing it just below the hanging banana. In another experiment, Köhler made this problem more difficult and 2 or 3 boxes were required to reach the banana. Moreover, the placing of one box on the other required different specific arrangements. In a more complicated experiment, a banana was placed outside the cage of the chimpanzee. 2 sticks, one longer than the other, were placed inside the cage. One was hollow at one end so that the other stick could be thrust into it to form a longer stick. The banana was so kept that it could not be picked up by any one of the sticks. The chimpanzee first tried to reach out to the banana with these sticks one after the other but failed. Suddenly, the animal had a bright idea and joined the 2 sticks together and reached the banana. In these experiments, Köhler used many different chimpanzees. Sultan, who was the most intelligent of Köhler's chimpanzees, could solve all the problems. Other chimpanzees could solve the problems only when they saw Sultan solving them. These experiments demonstrated to the role of intelligence and cognitive abilities in higher learning such as problem solving. The apes, somewhat higher animal, did not resort to the blind trial and error mechanism adopted by Thorndike's cat or the simple habit formation as in the case of Pavlov's dog. They reacted intelligently by identifying the problem, organizing their perceptual field and using insight, the term coined by Köhler, to reach a solution. Once a situation is perceived as a whole and the perceptual field is properly organized, a problem becomes solvable through flashes of insight. Though Köhler seemed to see insightful learning in terms of a sudden aha or a blot of lightning, it is found to depend upon factors such as experience. Past experience help in the insightful solution of problems. A child cannot solve the problems of modern mathematics unless she is well acquainted with its symbolic language. Intelligence. Insightful solution depends upon the basic intelligence of the learner. The more intelligent the individual, the greater will his insight be. Learning situation. How insightfully an individual will react depends upon the situation in which he has been placed. Some situations are more conducive to insightful solution than others. As a common observation, insight occurs when the learning situation is so arranged that all the necessary aspects are open to view. Module 2, Gestalt Laws of Learning. According to the Gestalt psychologists, we organize the separate parts of our perceptual field into a unified and meaningful whole. He argued that the whole is greater than and frequently different from the sum of its parts and formulated the principles of perceptual organization that make it so. They pointed out that we group and interpret stimuli perceptually in accordance with 4 laws. They are laws of similarity, proximity, closure and continuity. Law of similarity. This law states that when parts of a stimulus configuration are perceived as similar, they will also be perceived as belonging together. In the figure, the dots are noticed as two triangles. Law of proximity. This law states that elements that are near to each other are perceived as part of the same configuration. In the figures, the 6 line segments are perceived as 3 sets of line segments. Law of closure. This law states that we tend to close the open ends of figures, that is, fill in the gaps to make stimulus configuration complete. In the figure, the arcs are combined to perceive the figure as a complete circle. Law of continuity. This law holds that we link individual elements so that they form a continuous line or pattern that makes sense to us. For example, Fraser's spiral is not a spiral at all, but concentric circles. But we see them as spiral because we would like to give continuity by creating a spiral. As the Gestalt laws of perception demonstrate, what we perceive is not determined entirely by the features of the stimulus itself. All perception is really a selective grouping and interpretation of clues we receive from the environment. Our best guesses and expectations play a vital role in both accurate and inaccurate perception. We perceive things not as they are, but as we are indicates this subjectivity. Educational implications. Gestalt theory brings the following points into focus. From whole to parts. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. We must always proceed from the whole to the part so as to give a complete insight into the subject. To begin with, the teacher should present a picture of the topic of study as a whole. While teaching the topic parts of a flower, the flower should be presented before the students, and thereafter the parts should be taken up one by one in relation to the Gestalt. Integrated approach. The contents of a subject should not be treated as a mere collection of isolated facts. They could be closely integrated into a whole. In the same way, all subjects and activities of the curriculum should reflect unity and cohesion. Creating motivation. The teacher should arouse a child's curiosity, interest and motivation. He should be fully familiar with the specific aims and purposes of every task that is being undertaken. Emphasis on understanding. For all higher learning, mechanical repetition and blind processing are useless. What is needed is deep understanding and insight into the problem. Learning by insight saves time and energy. Problem solving approach. The theory stresses that learners must be given opportunities for exercising their powers of observation and thinking. The students should be placed in the position of discoverers. Progressive and scientific processes like analytical thinking and problem solving should be made use of for making the discoverers. Module 3, Lewin's field theory of learning. Kurt Lewin, a German psychologist in USA, put forward a theory and named Lewin's field theory in the year 1917. It was based on his doctoral dissertation. Kurt Lewin took the spirit of Gestalt theory and added to it some new concepts and coined a new terminology. Perception is a key issue in Lewin's theory of learning. According to Lewin, learning is a relativist process by which a learner develops a new insight or changes the old views through the structuring or restructuring of one's life space. In addition to the field theory, his system of description is also known as topological psychology or vector psychology. Kurt Lewin, unlike Pavlov, Skinner and Gestaltian psychologists, conducted experiments on the study of behavior of children. Lewin emphasized the study of behavior as a function of the total physical and social situation. Levine describes his viewpoint in the following formula: B is equal to F into PE. Here B represents behavior, F is a function, P is a person, and E is a total environmental situation. Basic terms used in Kurt Lewin's field theory. 1. Topology. It is a branch of mathematics which deals with the relative position of geometrical figures in a space. He used the topological concepts for representing the structure of life space in such a way to define the range of possible perceptions and actions. Life space or field. It is the psychological representative of the individual's environment. It includes the person's drives, motives, beliefs, thoughts, feelings, physical environment, etc. The life space of two persons in an identical situation may be entirely different. Life space is where one lives psychologically. 2. Vector. The term vector was borrowed by Levine from physics and used for representing a force capable of influencing movements toward or away from a goal. These are the psychological forces in life space. Vectorial concepts describe the dynamics of a situation, what's happening and what's likely to happen. The structure of his life space is through differentiation, generalization and restructurization of its respective regions or aspects. Cognitive or perceptual differentiation. It is the process within which regions are subdivided into smaller regions. In differentiation, relatively vague and unstructured regions of a life space become cognitively structured and more specific. Differentiation proceeds at different rates at different times during crisis periods such as adolescence. Its speed rapidly fluctuates. Cognitive generalization. It is a process whereby one formulates a generalized idea or concept. Through discerning some common characteristics of a number of individual cases and identifies the cases as a class of ideas or objects. A person identifies similarities among aspects of himself or his environment that had previously seemed quite different. When a child learns that cats, dogs, horses and birds are animals, he or she is generalizing. Then through a combination of differentiation and generalization, he or she may divide the physical world into vegetables, animals and mineral classes. Cognitive restructurization. A person not only differentiates and generalizes his life space into new regions, but simultaneously restructures his life space. He or she changes the meaning of respective regions in relationship to himself and to one another. With the process of restructurization, one defines or redefines directions in one's life space. One learns what actions will lead to what results. Person or individual. It represents all that is essential for him to behave as a complete individual in a given situation. It represents his psychological self expressed as I, my, mine, me, etc. A person is composed of a motor perceptual stratum or region and inner perceptual stratum or region. Motor perceptual stratum. It represents the abilities of an individual. The motor perceptual stratum has a position of a boundary zone between the inner personal region. And the psychological environment represents the cognitive or knowing and the manipulative abilities of a person. The practice of cognitive abilities entails a person using his senses to know about things. Manipulative abilities involve the use of muscles and glands to do things. In a sense, motor perceptual stratum is a tool of inner personal stratum. Inner personal stratum. It represents a person's need, which is the innermost part of a psychological person. A need is a state of a person that has part in determining behavior toward any goal that may exist in relation to that state, It corresponds to a personal tension. Valence. Valence is the attracting or repelling force. When a person is attracted by an object, that object is said to have positive valence. When a person is repelled by an object, is said to have negative valence. A Lie space may contain regions with several valences active at a time. These give rise to conflicts. Conflict. Arousal of various types of conflicts in the field theory has been explained with the help of the concepts of negative or positive valences in the form of opposite and almost equal forces operating at a time in the regions of one's Lie space. Field theory explains three types of conflicts. Approach conflict. It arises when the person is caught in between two goals both having positive valences. Approach avoidance conflict. It arises when a person is caught in between a positive and a negative goal. Avoidance conflict. It arises when the person is caught in between two goals both having negative valences. Field theory and learning. In cognitive field theory, learning is defined as an interactional process within which a person attains new insights or cognitive structures or changes old ones. Learning is a modification of development of insight into the nature of the person's world as represented by Lie space. A person changes the cognitive structure of his Lie space through differentiation, generalization and restructurization of its respective regions or aspects. A region is a distinguishable functional part of a Lie space. Insight and perception and continuity of Lie space facilitate transfer of learning in field theory. What a person perceives his world, he or she does not develop a photographic image of exactly what is out of there. Instead, he or she views, selects, simplifies, compares, completes, combines, separates and places into context the object of his experience. It is only through viewing his patterns of experience as a whole that he or she comes to understand and thereby is able to explain what he experiences. Everything is perceived or conceived in relation to other things. Also, a person perceives his environment depends upon the degree of his maturity, knowledge and goals. According to cognitive field psychologists, the interaction of a person and his environment is simultaneous and mutual. Both participate at the same time. In symbolic terms, this concept is simultaneous mutual interaction, the SMI concept. Thus, perception, relativistically and interactionally defined, is a cognitive experiential process within which a person psychologically simultaneously reaches out to his environment, encounters some aspects of it, brings these aspects into relationships with himself, makes something of these aspects, acts in relation to what he or she makes of them and realizes the consequences of the entire process. Let us summarize the major points in this session. This unit has provided a detailed description of two cognitive theories, Gestalt theories and Lewin'S field theory. The Gestalt psychologists criticize the behaviorist view that everything we see or think is got by putting together tiny bits. Instead, they advocated that we perceive and think of wholes. Lewin, through his field theory, tried to explain the central factor involved in the formation of Gestalt, namely the field. Now you can try to answer these questions given here. Explain the experiment of Köhler on chimpanzee. What is meant by perceptual differentiation? Explain the term Gestalt. What is cognitive restructurization? Explain Lewin's concept of conflict. Now, you can go through the books given here for further reading. Theories of Development, Concept and Applications by W.C. Crane in 1985, Englewood Cliffs, N.J. Prentice Hall. Cognitive Development 2nd edition by J.H. Flavel in 1985, Englewood Cliffs, N.J. Prentice Hall. Introduction to Psychology 4th edition by J.W. Kellart in 1996, USA, Books or Cole Publishing Company. Hope that you have enjoyed the session. We can meet again with another topic. Till then, take care.